What's been happening the last 3 weeks? Mega mass coronal ejections from the sun. And they haven't been directly hitting us as they shoot out like flamethrowers, but then as the sun turns, the dissipated storms still hit us, and they're massive, and they blow out satellites. And if you're an astronaut up there and one of them hits you, it'll kill you. And that's what's driving these earthquakes is the sun, the sun, the sun, the sun. Wow. Just last week, we saw a 8.1 earthquake hit southern Mexico, northern Central America, Guatemala. And we pointed out that much of the Americas that goes along the Pacific Rim has been overdue for megaquakes, according to most of the seismologists and experts out there. And you can see how all along the Pacific Rim, down the Pacific coast of North America, Central America, and South America, you see big, giant quakes going off, particularly in Mexico in the last 2 weeks. Now, you know who's next in line. El Norte. So we're dealing with a 7.1 that hit right dead smack middle in the big valley surrounded by volcanoes that is Mexico City. And you've got the rest of the Pacific Rim, the most active it's been in recorded history. And that earthquake that hit Mexico a week and a half ago was the biggest ever recorded since they've had seismology, since they've had seismographs. And the latest numbers to come out, they're rising by the hour, unfortunately. 20 children, school children, among the 248 killed in Mexico after their school collapsed during a 7.1 magnitude earthquake that triggered explosions, collapsed buildings, and sent people fleeing into the streets. And the footage is obviously dramatic. We're talking about swimming pools being completely emptied out because they're sloshing so hard. We're talking about 5, 10, 15-story buildings collapsing, larger buildings partially collapsing. And we were covering it right as the broadcast ended yesterday. It went into Owen Schroyer and Roger Stone and the War Room that airs 3 to 6 p.m. Central now, syndicated radio/television. So we had live coverage of that. But I had no idea, because so many videos we saw were people taking it in stride or just holding on to a tree, that it killed so many people. And undoubtedly, this is so big that this is the biggest disaster probably ever in Mexico history, because the population is triple what it was just 50 years ago. So metrically, as populations go up, as there's more buildings, as there's more infrastructure, earthquakes, even if you have more sturdy buildings, are still going to statistically kill more people. And California is due for an 8 or larger at any time. So just put that in your pipe and smoke it. So we should all be praying for Mexico and trying to send support down there as well. However, the different charities and organizations see best for us to donate. Obviously, smaller charities are generally better that have long track records of helping folks. The Red Cross, love my wife to death. I noticed her checkbook laying there, and she'd written a big check to the Red Cross. And I said, baby, I know you're smart, but if you're going to give to charities, please do research. I gave a check to Salvation Army for what happened in Florida, and a week before what happened in Houston. Not because I'm some goody two-shoes guy, but it's just the right thing to do. Plus, the Salvation Army, about 90% of the food, the shelter, the blankets, the educational training, things like that actually gets to the people. And it's a Christian organization. And it's far from perfect. It's got its problems. But the Red Cross is an anti-gun, anti-Christian organization. A lot of good people volunteer for it, like my wife. But it's just so frustrating because you don't want to tell somebody, hey, you're giving to a bad charity. You don't want to put somebody down. So everybody, just do your research. That's all I'm saying. because the Red Cross is a globalist organization. At least 248 people are dead after a 7.1 magnitude earthquake hit Mexico yesterday, causing widespread devastation across Mexico, where a school has collapsed. 20 children and 2 adults were confirmed dead after being found in the debris of the Rebsman school, with a further 30 children and 8 adults still missing as 2 a.m. today. The tremor struck near the state town of Rabaso, am I pronouncing that right? About 75 miles southeast of Mexico City, and came on the anniversary of another devastating earthquake in 1985. See how history rhymes or repeats itself? It also came just days after another 8.1 magnitude earthquake, which struck Chiapas, killed at least 98 people, and hours after nationwide emergency practice drills. Horrifying images coming out of the country's capital show rubble strewn across roads and enormous chunks of collapsed buildings laying on the ground, with hundreds of terrified locals fleeing onto the streets. Volunteer rescue worker Pedro Serrano, 29, a doctor who was one of the rescuers who managed to make it inside a collapsed school, where he found a classroom with all of the occupants dead. That's not a fun job, is that? Oh, man, that's horrible. Mexico earthquake has killed a lot of people. So pray for folks, give them support, and most importantly, realize that this is a very, very unstable planet we live on, very close to a big unstable sun. And the only thing constant is change. And so when they tell you pay your carbon taxes, or they seize on this and say, oh, look, it's Trump's fault, God is cursing us, which the Democrats and liberals are doing. I have a big story from Infowars.com showing it. You have to understand that this is part of life on this planet. And this is what happens. So if a tsunami hits you or an earthquake happens, that's not because you're an evil person. It's because that's the ever-changing planet we live on. Hurricanes, cyclones, typhoons, earthquakes, volcanoes. When Mount St. Helens blew up in, 1980 and killed thousands of people, it's not because Oregon was evil and deserved it. It was because we live on an active volcanic planet. That's why. It's part of life. The way God curses us is us cursing ourselves and being corrupt and being evil and letting corruption take over. And if you look at all of the abuses of government and corrupt institutions, it's hundreds of times what natural disasters are. And I love how the left always says it's voodoo when some Christian preacher says, we've been hit by a hurricane because there's gay people in Florida or whatever. And quite frankly, that is discrediting voodoo, in my view. The preacher doesn't speak for God. But it's just as bad when some leftist says, good, God sent a hurricane to kill all the rednecks in Texas or kill all the Trump voters in Florida. When movie stars come out and say that, it's mental illness. It's wrong. When when people like Jennifer Lawrence say that. So we're going to be covering it all. And here's a report. Trump offers condolences to Mexico after 7.1 quake. Leftists still attack the president on Twitter. God bless the people of Mexico City, Trump tweeted and stated. Within minutes of the 7.1 magnitude earthquake striking Mexico City Tuesday, President Trump and his wife offered swift condolences. But that wasn't enough for leftists, many of whom didn't bother to check whether the U.S. president had commented on the earthquake. Instead of focusing on the relief efforts, Trump haters predictably used the latest Mexico City quake as another opportunity to attack Trump. City catches on fire, 2 deadly hurricanes and counting, and at least 50 people die from earthquake. Trump, yeah, no climate, no real. What does that mean for Mr. Tryhorse? Just another stupid voodoo statement. Others even blamed Trump for the earthquake, and others asked if Trump would finally acknowledge climate change with one stating, God's not helping, so we have to. Wanting Trump to, again, come out and make statements he'd already made. Here's another statement. Waiting for Trump to ignore the earthquake in Mexico City, still deny climate change is a thing. So now they're saying earthquakes are man-made anthropogenic climate change. First it was global freezing was man in the 80s. Then it was global warming. Then it started cooling off a little bit. They went, it's just change, period. And now they've moved on with the total made-up garbage that earthquakes are caused by humans. No, they're caused by the gigantic sun that's firing all different sorts of ions and different radiation wavelengths at the giant Earth. And then that energy goes in and builds up on the outside and penetrates the crust, and it causes electromagnetic reflections with the nickel core of the planet. It's got so much gravity, it's solid, even though it's super hot. And then that causes all sorts of reflections back and forth between the crust, the mantle, and the core of the Earth with the sun's radiation, and that's directly linked to earthquakes. What's been happening the last 3 weeks? Mega mass coronal ejections from the sun. And they haven't been directly hitting us as they shoot out like flamethrowers, but then as the sun turns, the dissipated storms still hit us, and they're massive, and they blow out satellites. And if you're an astronaut up there and one of them hits you, it'll kill you. And that's what's driving these earthquakes is the sun, the sun, the sun, the sun, the sun. We'll be back.
What the aging process is when the cell replicates, we lose a little bit of our telomeres. Telomeres are the little cups on the end of our chromosomes.
And when it runs out, you start dying.
Secure your DNA force today at InfoWarsLife.com.